Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Off the Shelf. Today we are going to be talking about road trip books. Now, when I came up with this theme, I was thinking, what are some fun sort of summary things that could be translated into book themes? And road trips struck me as something that not only feel like quintessentially summer, but also I think after the year plus that we've had, everyone really just wants to get out and go do things. And I think road trips maybe hold a little bit of extra appeal. However, when I started to do research and put together my list of books, I came across an issue that bothered me. When I generally do this for videos, I try really hard to make my list as varied and diverse as possible. So, fiction, nonfiction, different genres, authors from a variety of backgrounds and perspectives, to give you a really broad sense of the types of books that are being published within that theme. But when I went to do the research for road trip books, I discovered that almost all of them seem to be written by white men. And that bothered me. First of all, because I don't want to sit here and share a whole bunch of books with you that are all just about white guys, or right? Like about them, written by them, all of that. Like that's not representative of our community, and I think that that's doing a disservice to all of us. But then I started to think about, why are all of these road trip books being written by white men? And what I think is that white men are able to travel on their own much more safely than anybody else. So for a white guy to pack up his stuff and hit the road, it's a fun adventure. For anybody else, there's at least a small bit of trepidation. Right? I mean, think about, as a woman, when I first started to drive as a teenager, I was taught a variety of safety, rules of thumb, basically, to keep myself safe as a woman. So, like, if you're being pulled over at night, make sure that you pull over in a well-lit, populated area. If you need to, proceed to a police station before being pulled over, because you don't know that the person there, first of all, is actually a cop, but also that even if they are a cop, that they don't have nefarious intentions. When you're out in the parking lot, hold your keys in your hand, maybe between your fingers, and don't unlock your car until you get right next to it, but also don't wait until you get there, then dig out your keys. You need to time it so that there's not a lot of opportunity for someone to come up behind you, to jump in your car once you've unlocked it, things like that, right? I think other women are going to say, yeah, I was taught that stuff too. And then I think if you are a person of color, there's even more to it than that you may not even realize that you are aware of consciously. It's just stuff that's ingrained in you. Not to stop certain places when you're driving, especially by yourself. So a road trip for someone who does not feel safe being just out on the road on their own, being able to stop whenever they need to, if there's a possibility of breaking down, that's not a fun adventure for them. That's a frightening undertaking. So I think that that's probably why there are not a lot of road trip books written by people other than white men. I have a problem with that, that I think as a society we need to work on addressing. Obviously, we're not going to do that today in this video. Like, I can't change the world with my one little library video. So we are going to be talking about road trip books. They are written by a bunch of white dudes. I have a couple of white women in here too. But just something for you to think about, another perspective on it, that while these books, maybe most of them portray it as a fun vacation adventure sort of situation, that's not going to be the case for everybody. So, I'm going to start out with Assassination Vacation by Sarah Vowell. And I love Sarah Vowell. I think she writes really funny and insightful things. She focuses largely on American history, and in this one she takes a trip around the country and stops at various spots of significance in terms of political murder, so assassination. And it's a little macabre, but it's funny, and if you're interested in American history, I absolutely recommend her. She has several books. I think this is her best one, but she has several and they're all entertaining. So definitely check it out. Then I've got a classic for you, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Whew, that was hard. I don't know how you could be unfamiliar with The Hobbit, but perhaps you are. If you are, it is the story of the Hobbit Bilbo Baggins and his trip across the lands where he has to go and retrieve the ring. So Gandalf the wizard comes and says, "Come with me, we're going on an adventure," basically. And he steps outside of his hobbit hole in the Shire and goes off on this adventure. And this book was written for a little bit of a younger audience than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I have always found this to be much more approachable. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is a little bit more high fantasy. It's written kind of more as a high fantasy. And while it's all the same world and everything, this one is written in a way that is, I guess, like I said, it's more approachable. It's more approachable. I think the first time I read this, I was in middle school, and I read it in one sitting. So I definitely recommend The Hobbit if somehow you have not read it. I don't know what you're waiting for. It's great. You should get on that. Then I have All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. And I feel like I've talked about Cormac McCarthy recently. He is a beautiful writer. He writes beautiful prose. And this is a story that really kind of evokes the end of the American West ideal, I would say. It centers on a young Texas rancher, and he's the last in a line of ranchers there on this piece of land. And he and a couple of his friends saddle up their horses and decide they're going to go find their fortune across the border in Mexico. So they ride into Mexico, and some of it's funny, some of it's heartfelt, some of it's terrible, but it's just a beautiful, beautiful book. And so if you like that sort of feel of the American West and sort of the disintegration of what we hold in our brains as the idea of the American West, then I definitely recommend this book. I've got Let's Get Lost by Adi Al-Said, maybe, I think. So this is a YA book. It's a little bit manic pixie dream girl situation happening here, which tends to not be my jam, but it definitely is somebody's because there are a lot of books with that trope. So if that's up your alley, then I'm gonna say, like, pick up this book. But it follows a girl named Lila and her trip across the country, and she meets 4 people who, her meeting them changes their lives. And then she has to reevaluate how meeting those people has in turn changed her own life. So if you're looking for that sort of teen evaluating everything in your life and what's going on and maybe a little bit of angst situation, definitely check this one out. I also really just like the cover. The cover's fun. Another teen one for you. This is Amy and Roger's Epic Detour by Morgan Matson. And this is a story of Amy, whose father died in a car accident. So she's been really hesitant. She doesn't want to drive at all. She's been sort of hesitant about even riding in cars. But her mother has taken a job across the country and has already left to start that job while Amy was finishing up the school year back in the family home. So now Amy's ready to go meet up with her mom, and her mom has enlisted a family friend, Roger, who also needs to be across the country. I believe he's starting college on the East Coast there in California, and so he agrees to drive Amy across the country, and they've been given a route. It's all planned, and then they take an epic detour. And it's a sweet romance. It's a lot of fun. They have some awesome adventures. So if you're looking for just sort of a sweet, fun summer read, I absolutely recommend this. I would recommend any of Morgan Matson's books if that's kind of the vibe that you're looking for. She is a fun writer, and I had the opportunity to meet her a couple of years ago, and she was fun to hear speak as well. Then I have to tell you, I'm going to recommend a book for you guys that I do not like. I really, really don't like this book. But we have this tenet in librarianship that every book has its reader. So just because I don't like this book does not mean that you will not. And maybe you've already read it and you love it. So we're each entitled to our own opinions. We have our own preferences. And that's the amazing thing about books, is there's so much out there that there's something for everybody. The other thing I want to say, first of all, is if you start a book and it's just not clicking for you, or you just really don't like it, it is okay to stop reading that book. Just put it down, bring it back to the library, and pick something else. You do not need to force yourself to finish a book just because you started it. This was a lesson that was really hard for me to learn. This is the book that taught me. Okay? On the Road by Jack Kerouac is a classic road trip book, and I could not read it. I got through maybe half of it before going into work and just ranting to a coworker about how much I hated what was going on in the story. And this is the book that really taught me it's okay to not power through and finish something that you're not enjoying. So that's why I'm sharing it with you, to let you know that, first of all, just because I don't like a book doesn't mean that you won't like a book. And second of all, if you don't like a book, you can put it down, okay? No judgment. Please don't waste your time on something you're not enjoying. But On the Road is the story of Sal Paradise and Dean Moriarty and their travels, and they meet up with other people, and they're just, living their best lives, driving around and working when they need a little bit of money. And I don't know how to describe this book because, like I said, but the description that I found for it says that this is a classic novel of freedom and longing that defined what it meant to be beat. So this is a Beat Generation book, and it has inspired every generation since its initial publication. So I think if you are looking for something that kind of is evoking freedom and the longing for freedom and finding your own place in the world, then this is definitely one to check out. If you are interested in the beats and the beat movement of the mid 20th century, again, this is a classic for that. We only have it in audio. I'm sure we can track it down for you in print if you'd prefer that. But check it out and see what you think of it. And then let me know. I would love to hear what you think of this book. It was not my jam, but I know there are people that absolutely love it. So if it sounds interesting to you, take a look. Then we have got Where the Lost Wander. That is hard to read, that font, isn't it? I don't love that font choice, but anyway, by Amy Harmon. This is a newer book, and it's a historical fiction set in the 1850s on the Overland Trail. So the main character is traveling with her family in a wagon train on the Overland Trail. She meets a man, they fall for each other, they make some promises, and then tragedy strikes. She loses a bunch of her family, she's separated from the man, and if you've played Oregon Trail, you kind of have an idea of all the horrible things that can happen when traveling across the country in a covered wagon. But like I said, this is a newer book, definitely check it out. Okay, next. This is Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff, and it is set in 1954. The main character is a young black man whose father has gone missing, and he and his uncle, who is the author of the Safe Negro Travel Guide, which is one of those books that tells people where it's safe to stop, where they will give you hotel rooms, things like that. They go off in search of his father to find out what happened to him. And this is, as the name suggests, a Lovecraftian horror. So there are monsters and terrible things lurking that they're going to encounter. This was recently made into a TV show. I haven't seen it yet, and I'm not sure where, like what network, streaming service, whatever it's on. But the book came out a couple of years ago, and we only just recently got it because of the interest now that it was optioned. It is written, even though the main characters are black, it is written by a white man. So take that as you will. I am absolutely not going to sit here and tell you that, white people cannot write stories that focus on people who are not white, that straight people cannot write stories that focus on people who are not straight. That's absolutely not the case. However, I do think that it's something, when you're reading a book, something to be aware of, that maybe this person has not lived the experiences that their character might have. So it might be less authentic than if you found an Own Voices author writing about it. At the same time, if it's a horror, if it's a fantasy, you're never gonna have someone who lived the experience of being a wizard, right? So there's a little bit of a balance there, and it's something that I think you should just be aware of when you're reading books, when you're selecting books. But definitely don't automatically discount a book because the author has not had the same lived experience as their characters. I've got another nonfiction for you here. This is The Lost Continent by Bill Bryson. I love Bill Bryson. I think that he's a really entertaining writer. He writes a lot of travel nonfiction stories, but not stories, not essays exactly, travelogue type stuff. And he is from Des Moines, Iowa. He spent several years as an adult living in England. He wrote a couple of books about living in England and traveling around England and learning the history of the places that he visited. And those are lots of fun. I have not read this one yet, but I expect that it's also in that same vein, really interesting, funny, and insightful in a way that doesn't, bring you down. Because some insightful, you're like, oh, that's deep, that's a lot. And some make you go, huh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Let me give that some more thought. I feel like he's in the second category on that one, but this book came about when he returned to the United States from England and set off on a road trip looking for a specific town, and found all these little towns that looked just like every other little town he'd been through. So he really kind of delves into small town America in this book. And I think that if you are interested in that sort of writing, then Bill Bryson is absolutely an author that you need to check out. And then I've got Find Me by Laura Vandenberg. This isn't strictly a road trip book. Road trip is only part of it. There's a little bit of a science fiction sort of thing. There's an unexplained sickness going on that the main character, who has been struggling with her own demons, an addiction to cough syrup, things like that, turns out she's immune to this sickness that's spreading. And so she ends up in a hospital with several other people, taking all kinds of things as a way to find out how the people who are not immune can be helped. Scientifically, I don't see how that makes sense, but I haven't read the book, so I can't pass judgment on that. But she's in this hospital in Kansas and decides she's gonna get out. So she escapes the hospital, hits the road, drives to Florida, and along the way sort of has to come to terms with her own life and her own memories, and really, I think road trips, especially in books, give you that time and space to evaluate your past and your future in a way that when you're going about your day-to-day life, you don't have that time. And so that's what she ends up doing in this book. As I said, I haven't read it, so I don't know how far into the whole mystery, illness, science fiction-y realm it actually goes. But someone please read this book and come and let me know, because I'm curious. And my to-read list is thousands of books long at this point, so I'm probably not going to get around to this one. But you should. You absolutely should. This is one I have read. This is American Gods by Neil Gaiman, and it was made into a TV show on Starz a couple of years ago. Maybe several years ago now. Time has no meaning. But it follows Shadow, and just before he's released from prison, his wife dies in a mysterious car accident. So when he gets out of prison, he's determined to find out what actually happened. And he meets up with a man who calls himself Mr. Wednesday. And he's a really enigmatic dude. And he claims to be a refugee from a distant war. He's a former god. And he introduces Shadow to a lot of other people that he knows from that life who are now living in America, but they're all of these former gods. And Shadow ends up in a world that he didn't know even existed, and that he's not super comfortable with, as they're traveling across the country, finding information, meeting people. I love Neil Gaiman. I think that he writes things that are they're meaty and interesting and fun all at the same time. And this is gonna sound really weird, but I feel like sometimes his stuff kind of tickles your brain. Like, it gets you thinking, but at the same time, it's just so entertaining. So I absolutely recommend this book and its follow-up. I have not seen the show, so I cannot speak to how well they translated the book into the show, but the characters look amazing in it. At some point I'm gonna have to watch it, but definitely check out this book. So those are our road trip books. As I said, I'm not thrilled that it is almost entirely white men, but again, I think that there are real and not happy reasons for that. Anyway, it's summer reading has started. Get yourself a fun summer book. Get yourself something that's going to make you think about something a little bit differently. And then make sure that you're following along with us both in the 2021 EAPL Reading Challenge. As the name suggests, it's going on all year long over on Beanstack or on the paper form. And also join us for summer reading. For teens, it is Tales and Tales, so a little bit more of an animal theme. Doesn't mean anything, read whatever you want. And for adults, it's Trails and Tales, which we did a little bit more of a hiking theme. But again, read whatever you want. It doesn't need to be outdoorsy themed. Read all the fun, like cozy, mysteries if that's what you're into. But please read with us. I love hearing what you guys are reading. Please come in and let me know. And until next time, happy reading.